The year is 1981, and we just got through celebrating one of the biggest revolutions in the history of heavy metal music. In 1980, we had the heralded new wave of British heavy metal. But here, just 1 year later, we have another big movement, the fourth big movement in the history of heavy metal that doesn't quite get near enough credit. Get out the hairspray, everybody. The California glam metal explosion is about to happen. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. If you've been watching this channel, we're going through year by year through the history of heavy metal, giving out the Grammy Awards that should have been given to the great heavy metal and hard rock stars of the day. And one of those awards that we give out every year is Newcomer of the Year. Now, as I said in the intro, in 1980, that would have been dominated by bands breaking through with the new wave of British heavy metal. Over my shoulder, you see Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, and more brought an explosion of heavy metal music. But in 1981, we see another big wave of music coming in, the fourth wave, if you will. And it doesn't get much attention, and quite frankly, really causes controversy and a split among the fan base. The California glam metal scene is about to erupt, and many fans of heavy metal music have very mixed emotions about this. So it doesn't really get all the attention that the new wave of British heavy metal gets. Today, we're going to take a look at the beginning of that movement. Now, when we talked about the new wave of British heavy metal, it was largely brought about, inspired by Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, more of the traditional heavy metal. While here, the California glam metal is really brought into being by an inspiration of Kiss. Now, if you remember from our episodes in the 70s, Kiss was a major player on the stage. They had some of the most commercially successful hard rock and heavy metal of all time. And they inspired a ton of young bands that are now starting to come of age and starting to make their own music. There is no doubt that Kiss was the biggest inspiration for this glam metal experience. Now, before we get to that, let's talk about Kiss for a second because, well, Kiss has fallen on hard times. They were one of the biggest bands in the world. 6 fantastic studio albums, 2 live albums, but then a series of really questionable decisions has brought them low. Right after Kiss Alive 2, there was rumblings that Ace Frehley wanted to do a solo album. Kiss wasn't really keen on that idea, and so they decided, let's get this out of the way, and let's all 4 make solo albums. And quite frankly, that was not the best decision because the only decent solo album of the bunch was Ace Frehley's. The other 3 were, at best, forgettable. You have to be a really hardcore Kiss fan to get anything out of the Paul Stanley solo album. Let's just leave it there. Not only that, as a young Kiss fan, a band putting out 4 albums at once was really a hit on the old pocketbook. Not a big fan of that move. Then, after that, they decided to put out a new album, Kiss Dynasty. And the backing of this was filled with like disco beats, as Kiss was really starting to embrace the movement that was disco. Unfortunately for Kiss, disco was about to fall from the sky like a bag of wet cement and kind of took Kiss with them. I Was Made for Loving You was one of their biggest hits, but as disco crashed and burned, so did Kiss. Their next album, I don't know how to say this politely, may be the worst purchase of an album that I've ever made. And that's saying something. Kiss Unmasked was terrible. And we find out that Peter Criss has already quit the band. Anton Fig of Dave Letterman's fame, he's actually playing the drums on this, even though Peter Criss appears in the credits and on the album cover. Peter Criss is long gone, and this album is terrible. Meanwhile, the new wave of British heavy metal is coming on. Everything's getting heavier and harder, and Kiss, between their disco misadventures, some mediocre solo albums, and then this lemon, was really starting to get out of touch. So, Kiss decided to make another bold move, to be the soundtrack for a movie coming out called The Elder. So Kiss put out a soundtrack for that movie, but once again, misfortune hit, as that movie was never made, and Kiss had this album that, while critically acclaimed, and a step, I think, trying to return to a heavier sound, was a commercial flop. In short, nobody went out and got this album, and without the movie to back it up and get it in the spotlight, it kind of died a horrible commercial death. Now, Kiss started to realize, again, they're out of sync, and so they start to get a little heavier, and they put out their heaviest album since way back in the day, Creatures of the Night. But once again, things are not going well, as Ace Frehley has now quit the band. I believe that when Ace Frehley left Kiss, that was kind of it for me. I really was a big Ace Frehley fan, and I think his guitar work was one of the most underrated aspects of the Kiss sound. As he departs, it's like sayonara Kiss. So as the movement they inspired is kicking off, Kiss is nowhere to be found. They are, as I said, really yesterday's news. Now, there is a bit of a silver lining to all this. A couple of years down the road, Kiss is going to take off the makeup and once again prominently play a role in the big hair glam metal movement in the 80s. So it all kind of ends up in a happy ending. There's a reunion, but that's a story for another time. We're not here to talk about Kiss. We're here to talk about the band that kicked off this big explosion. You probably have guessed by now. Motley Crue. They put out their first album, Too Fast for Love, and they are the artist spotlight today as we take a look at this initial album. Many people, incorrectly in my opinion, credit the beginning of the California explosion of hard rock music to Van Halen. And I guess they have a good reason, because Van Halen is from California. But Van Halen and the glam metal movement really, I don't think, has much of a tie-in. Where I pinpoint the beginning of the California glam metal scene is right here in 1981 with the band Motley Crue and their debut album, Too Fast for Love. And with any great movement, usually at the core of that is a really great band and a really great album. And I think you'll see that that is the case here. Motley Crue was so good, it kind of opened the door for a lot of bands in the LA scene to get their shot. And the next thing you know, the Hollywood Strip is full of big hair metal bands trying to make it big. But it all starts right here with Too Fast for Love. And I want to go through the tracks on this album because it is quite a good album. The first song on this album might be the very best song Motley Crue ever wrote, Live Wire. Not only is this the first song on the album, but this is also the introduction to Motley Crue because they made a video for this. And I want to say that when you look at a lot of the big movements in the 80s, a lot of it, bands who understood how to use the new medium of music videos. MTV still played videos. I know that whenever I had a chance to get near a TV, man, I was flipping on MTV and checking out the newest music. Motley Crue, we'll talk about this throughout their career, really knew how to put together videos, really knew how to bring themselves into the spotlight in a very good way. It starts right here with Live Wire. I remember seeing this for the first time, and the first thing that really struck me was Nikki Sixx. had this bass guitar. I believe it was called a Warlock designed bass guitar that I thought was the badass thing I've ever seen. Like, I was used to just seeing, your standard guitars. Really cool guitar. At one point in the video, they light Nikki Sixx on fire. It is quite the video, and it's quite the song. What a way to start off. Like, you can't find, I don't think, a faster, heavier song than right here on their very first song, Live Wire, one of my all-time favorites. Now, the second song on here is called Come On and Dance. This is another, fine song. Really keeps the energy going on this album. And the one thing, whether you're a big fan of hair metal or, it's not your cup of tea, the one thing you will have to admit, and Motley Crue is great with this, they know how to keep the energy going. This song keeps the album going. Now, I will say this, and this is something that they lose, thank goodness. Tommy Lee is a great drummer. We'll talk about him a lot. But in this first album, he really leans on the cowbells a little too much. And, I just can't get that vision of Will Ferrell out of my head. So I'm not a big fan of the cowbells. But this is a really good song to keep the flow of the album. And then I think we hit the stretch of the album that I like the most. This is why this album is so good. It starts right here with Public Enemy #1. This is really the first time, like, Nikki Sixx is the hero in this song. The bass playing in this song is amazing. And we really, Mick Mars has a great guitar solo in it. Really, this is the first time you really go, wow, who's that guitarist? Mick Mars really puts one of his best solos together right here. But again, the only thing that I would take away from the song, you gotta laugh, more cowbells. You don't really picture Motley Crue playing cowbells, and in later days, that even, sounds ridiculous. But here it is, their first album, and Tommy Lee's just banging on those suckers. But I really like Public Enemy #1. While Come On and Dance is okay, I think the album really kicks off, again, really good here. And then it actually even gets better. Maybe my second favorite song on this album, Merry-Go-Round. One of the things that tends to happen in heavy metal music is you have this heavy song, and then they kind of break into a chorus that's a little lighter. This is kind of flips it on its head. The song itself starts off, and you think, it's going to be all right. And then that chorus kicks in, and it's got such a hard edge. And again, Mick Mars comes in, does a great guitar solo. This is the first time on the entire album they've kind of changed speeds, taking it down a notch, but also twisted up the intensity a little bit. I really like this one. Merry-Go-Round, like I said, maybe my second favorite song on this track, on this whole album. Check it out. And then the next song is another good one, Take Me to the Top. I really like Tommy Lee's drumming on here. One of the things that we're going to talk about here, Tommy Lee is a very underrated drummer. And I'll tell you why. Because Tommy Lee, pause that thought for a second. One of the things that's unique about Motley Crue is that maybe the two most famous members of the band are the bass player, Nikki Sixx, and the drummer, Tommy Lee. But Tommy Lee's probably more notorious than he is famous for his musical abilities, because, of course, he's, in the tabloids for a number of years with his fairly publicly visible romance with Pamela Anderson. But don't sleep on him as a drummer, really. And I think as Motley Crue advances, Tommy Lee really becomes better and better at this. One of the most underrated drummers going. But the other one I want to talk about on this album, or on this song in particular, is Mick Mars. Is Mick Mars one of the greatest guitarists of all time? When you start talking about, people at this level, yes, he's a great guitar player. They're all great guitar players at this point. But when we're talking about in the heavy metal echelons, I don't think Mick Mars really gets into that list. And there's a reason, right? He doesn't have really those crunchy riffs like Tony Iommi. He's not a speedy player. He's not like an Yngwie Malmsteen. He doesn't do a lot of special effects with, like, Eddie Van Halen. But Mick Mars has some of the coolest effects of any guitarist out there. I would put him up against a lot of them when it comes to just being innovative and being distinct and unique in his sound. This album, Mick Mars has such a cool guitar effect on this song. Ooh, really love it. Like I say, it's hard to pin down what makes Mick Mars special, but he really experiments a lot with the way he plays the guitar and how he does like little special run-ins to, coming out of the chorus with like special effects. When you hear a Motley Crue song, right away, you hear Mick Mars, you know who it is because he is so distinctive and really one of the most innovative guitarists around. Really like his playing on this one. The next song is Piece of Your Action. And Vince Neil, this is kind of one of those songs where he really cuts it loose. Again, kind of like Mick Mars. I don't think Vince Neil's going to go down as one of the greatest heavy metal vocalists of all time. But he is a great frontman, and he really brings, again, a lot of energy. And especially in the early days, really cuts it loose on a few songs. This one is one of those songs. Really like this song, Piece of Your Action. Now, whenever I do one of these album reviews, I always try to find a deep track. And here it is, Starry Eyes. This is one of those, well, if you listen to the lyrics of the song, it's a little embarrassing, but somehow, with these kind of cheesy lyrics, once again, Mick Mars turns this song around to really having some badass chords on it. And it's kind of like, the song we were talking about with Merry Go Round. The lyrics and the song itself are kind of light and cheesy, and maybe not, when you first start listening to it, maybe not something you right away gravitate to. But Mick Mars, sometimes it's so reverse of how most people do it. He does some really heavy stuff in the choruses that I really appreciate, and he does that here. So, not a big hit, a very deep track, but one surprisingly that I like very much. And that leads us to the title track, Too Fast for Love. Once again, I keep talking about Mick Mars, but this guitar intro is sick. And I will also say this is probably my favorite Vince Neil song as far as his singing. Really brings it on this song. Maybe Vince Neil's best vocal performance. Now the rest of the album, On With the Show's okay. It's kind of like we're starting to get into that obligatory ballad that, is notoriously present on all the California glam metal albums. But as far as a ballad goes, it's pretty good. It kind of has a lively chorus, so it doesn't, drag on or get too cheesy. Toast of the Town, Tonight, kind of a weak ending for this album, if we're being honest. I don't really care much for those last two tracks. They're okay. So the strength of the album is probably, first of all, Livewire, like I said, one of the best songs they've ever done. And then from Public Enemy to Too Fast for Love, that stretch is awesome. So if you've never gone back this far into the Motley Crue catalog, I have a little bit of a sordid history with Motley Crue. I love these first two albums. I love this album. I like Shout at the Devil even more. That's going to come out here in a bit. But they also have some albums that I don't care for at all. And then they get into Theater of Pain and Girls, Girls, Girls. And I kind of lose the thread a little bit. Don't like those albums in the least bit. So, a lot of, and then Motley Crue kind of gets big again with Dr. Feelgood in that era. So a lot of people have never really gone all the way back to this album. But do yourself a favor. Go back to this one. This has that raw energy that really, like I said, sparked a revolution. And California glam metal was, on the map. But there was a couple of other interesting debut albums in 1981. Let's talk about them. One of my favorite bands that came out of this scene was a band called Dokken. The one that rhymes with rockin'. One of the best lead singers in the entire glam movement, Don Dokken. And oh boy, when you want to talk about great guitarists, George Lynch really is one of the most unheralded players around. He is fantastic. Go out and find George Lynch material, whether it's Dokken or Lynch Mob. You will not be disappointed. What a great guitarist. Love Jeff Pilson. Really good bass player on this one as well. Mick Brown's also a wild man on the drums. Dokken, really good band. Now, Dokken's kind of interesting because their debut album comes out this year as well, but not in America. Their debut is over in Europe on Saxon's old label, Carrera. Carrera is one of those, it's a French label. Saxon never really got much of a, push from them. And then they're still trying to, obviously have a hard rock presence. They signed Dokken, but the rest is history. Dokken ends up coming back with this same album, Breaking the Chains, in the United States in a couple years on a brand new label, and off we go. So I can't really include it in the debut albums because it's not released in the States, and of course the Grammy Awards are based on music that's available here. But yeah, be on the lookout. Dokken is going to go. Breaking the Chains is an okay album, nothing too much to write home about, but oh boy, then they really kick in with a couple of all-time great albums, Tooth and Nail and Under Lock and Key. When we get to the mid-'80s, we're going to talk a lot about those albums. They're fantastic. But there's a glam metal debut happening, not in California, that we're going to talk about next. One of the most unheralded bands in the entire glam metal movement debuts this year as well. Hailing all the way over from Finland, Hanoi Rocks. One of my favorite frontman lead singers in the entire glam movement right here, Michael Monroe. What a character, what a person who just is mesmerizing on the stage. I really like his stuff. I don't think they ever really got the credit that they deserved for two reasons. Number one, they're a glam metal band from Finland. Not really a country you really associate with glam metal. And, it's like, glam metal out of Finland. How did that happen? But number two, tragedy struck the band a few years after they started. 1984, I believe, 1983, there was an incident. Unfortunately, it ties in with Motley Crue, where Hanoi Rocks and Motley Crue were getting together. They were having a party. It was December 8th, I believe. And lots of heavy drinking. Vince Neil and the drummer for Hanoi Rocks, Razzle, go out for more alcohol and get involved in a serious car accident. And Razzle is unfortunately killed in that car accident. Really stunted the growth of Hanoi Rocks. Interestingly enough, Michael Monroe, the lead singer, was like the only member of the band who wasn't at that party as he was recovering from an injured leg. And it really hurt Motley Crue too, because Vince Neil was at the wheel. How awful it has to be someone who, we all know about the excesses of rock and roll and the drinking and the drugs and all that happened. But, when you sober up and you realize one of your best friends has been killed because of your carelessness, and then, of course, there was, trials and all the things that happened around vehicular homicide, really kind of hurt both bands a great deal. And obviously, that pales in comparison to the death of Razzle. But Hanoi Rocks was a really good band. So if you are a fan of the glam rock, but never got into Hanoi Rocks, come back right here to 1981 and start going through the catalog. Very good stuff. And Michael Monroe actually does a couple of solo albums later on that are excellent. So really good catalog to take a look at. Now, the Grammys that year had an interesting choice for Newcomer of the Year. They went with Sheena Easton. Now, at least Sheena Easton wasn't a one-hit wonder, but she had a big hit back in 1981. My Baby Takes the Morning Train. He works from 9 to 5. Very big song. Sheena Easton also would, in the very next year, provide the theme song for one of the James Bond movies. And of course, has another big hit a few years later as she teams with Prince. However, having a few hits and being on James Bond movies pretty impressive, but it's not as impressive as the career Motley Crue's having. Again, starting an entire revolution of music coming out of California, millions of albums sold. Their impact on music, I think, is undeniable. So not only is Motley Crue going to win for Best Heavy Metal Hard Rock Newcomer of the Year, they really deserve the Grammy for Best Newcomer of the Year across the board. Congratulations to Motley Crue. It's a clean sweep. Well, that's our show for this week. As we break into 1981, we're going to be doing our usual. We're going to talk about the best hard rock. We're going to talk about the best heavy metal, best vocalists, best instruments. We're going to be doing all that in the coming weeks. Very similar to how we broke apart 1980. We're going to do the same thing in 1981. So this is a great chance for you to subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell. Get notified. Be a subscriber. Give this video a thumbs up. You don't want to miss the content of this, because while 1980, I will say hands down, the best year in heavy metal and hard rock music, 1981 is very close, right? They're still right there at the epicenter. There are so many good heavy metal albums. There are so many good hard rock. The competition this year for instrumental and vocals, so impressive. So you want to keep tuning in. The best way to do that, so you don't forget, is to subscribe and get alerts. We do this every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Denver Mountain Time. And so, join us live. It's fun. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.